Welcome to PrimeAlpha's interview series, insights from industry practitioners discussing their journey and their discoveries. Hello, my name is Amanda Jogia, the CEO of PrimeAlpha, an online ecosystem bringing together alternative opportunities and their investors. I have the pleasure of having Peter Borish with us today. Since starting his career at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, Peter has been at the intersection of technology, financial markets, and innovation. He called the 1987 market crash, and coupled with his appointment to the Brady Commission, fostered his commitment to public policy and nonprofits. He was recruited by Paul Tudor Jones, where Peter helped build Tudor Investments into a leading global macro hedge fund. In addition to his hedge fund businesses, which he continues today at Computer Trading Corporation, Peter has been an angel investor in startup technology companies, including Majestic Research, Quadro Serve, One Chicago, and Charity Buzz. He mentors young entrepreneurs as an advisory board member of Value Stream Ventures. He is also a founding trustee of the Robin Hood Foundation, which helps raise families out of poverty in New York City. And Peter was recently appointed to the Market Risk Advisory Committee of the Commodities Futures Trading Commission. Welcome, Peter. It's a pleasure to have you here with us today. Let's just jump in and talk about what you have been up to outside of business. What has been inspiring you or been at the forefront of your thinking recently?
The three things for me that I'm doing is, so I look at myself, I've gone through this and I'm well situated for this. So I consider myself a coach and not a player. And in this business, it's really a lot like being an athlete, right? You've got to be mentally sharp. You've got to be physically in shape, and you really need to be flexible. And as an economist, your risk preference change as you get older. So I can't take as much risk now as I did when I was 25. And so I'm advising a couple of VC funds, 25 to 35, where they're innovative, they can take risk, they're willing to roll up their sleeves, do the kind of deep dive, which is also why John, who's in his early 40s, right? He's got experience now. He's right in the middle of that sweet spot for the next stage. So I'm trying to cover all sorts of the cap table. So you have VC, which would be Series A. So I invest in that. I try to, for advisory role, take a few points of the fund and maybe go on some boards of the portfolio companies. That's where I am now with that. And then my main source of income is I've been doing strategy consulting for CIBC, talking to their risk and really deep dive into macro scenario playing, role playing. What are things doing here with regard to that? Not the regular stuff that you can get on the 6:30 news or you can get from anything, but try to think out of the box. That's what risk management is all about. And I think if you're discussing in an audience, particularly with younger people, and because of my background and my experience, I often get the question, what's the next black swan? What's going to be out there? And I'm like, if you can think about it, it's not a black swan. If you can think about it, that's all part of risk management. So whether that's a conflict or energy prices go to 110 like they went in 08, or whether there's political issue, or whether President Biden is sick, or whether Trump drops dead tomorrow, those are all things you can think about. Those are risk management. A black swan is like, hey, I went to bed on a Tuesday and I woke up on a Wednesday and a condo in Miami fell to the ground. That never entered into anyone's mind. That's a black swan. So there's a huge difference between risk management, scenario playing, role playing, going out there. People call it stress tests, and what's really a black swan. So when someone says to me, oh, I saw it coming, then it's not a black swan. Whether that's the 87 crash or, the financial crisis or the dot-com bubble. In this business, after the fact, everything is obvious.
Right, hindsight.
Yeah, my next firm, I'm going to call it Hindsight Capital. You give me money today, and I will tell you what happened yesterday. And my batting average will be extraordinarily high. And I'll charge you high fees, but you won't make any money.
Right. Right. It so resonates with me. I love the fact that you said the stage or a coach, not a player. You have such a long career. If you could give yourself advice, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give yourself when you were starting at Tudor?
Great question. I think the first advice, like anything in business, is you need to live in the moment and do it because it's your job. I'm always fond of saying, and other people also say it, that if someone tells you do what you're passionate at, they're already rich. In your 20s, you should be working really, really hard. And if you want to get to that point where you can do what you're passionate about, and in my case, that has to do with the helping New York City, philanthropy, Robin Hood, etc. That's what I'm passionate about. But I never thought about that at that time. The advice I would give is continue to work, and you cannot worry about, yes, you're making sacrifices. But again, if you go back, that's what you are. You're supposed to work really hard in your 20s. Maybe you sort of get married and have kids in your 30s. And then in your 40s, you can try to get back to a semblance of a normal life. And then when you become an empty nester, you can go do what you're passionate about. But if you start doing what you're passionate at, that's kind of like any kind of athlete. Every 10-year-old boy, or these days women too, think they're going to be playing in the NBA or the WNBA. That's not happening. Don't tell me you bought Google or you're a hedge fund manager. It's not the same thing. So get in an environment where you're going to learn. And the VC people, which I like to be around, because I like to be around smart, motivated, younger people who, as I said, are willing to take risk. They've all worked hard. They've all had some sort of experience of doing that and have learned that I could do an hour podcast on cliche. So I try very hard to stay away from that, right? So it's not that you learn from failure, because you should be learning from success as well. But what you should be learning is innovation is based on passion, belief, and determination. And those are things I'm looking for. And I'm always looking for people that are really intellectually curious. And that's the key. So my younger self, that's where I was. I was willing to work all day, all night. And one of the things that set us apart at Tudor is our intellectual curiosity. And all the credit in the world there goes to Paul Jones in a lot of ways, because he was willing to invest in data, in technology, far before it was popular.
Yeah. I came into the alt space much later on this side, but I actually love it because I find it so intellectually stimulating. I feel like it's always something new. And there's always someone, like you said, thinking outside of the box or finding an angle I never thought about or someone else hasn't thought about. I find that super, super interesting. And that point of living in the moment, it's very important. And I know with COVID, everyone's doing this whole life reassessment. Like, what is this all for? But I feel like what you're saying, and tell me if I'm wrong, is you work hard to have options and then you get to do what you're passionate about later on.
I always said people in our business always work so hard because they don't want to work. If you can follow that contradiction. Now, for somebody like me, what was the downside to COVID? If you don't have any friends, then you're alone all the time, and COVID justified that. So that was relatively easy for me. Mm-hmm. But I do think, all kidding aside on that score, do not pick up lazy habits. And so when you think about outside of the box, yes, is business travel going to change? As much as I think about PrimeAlpha and go, wow, do I really want to take the train down to Baltimore for an hour meeting and come back? Before, it might have been a sign of respect to go ahead and do that. Now, I think it's understanding on both sides that that's okay. But don't get lazy in terms of your mental approach to work. I think that wearing athletic leisure all day is not conducive to being as intellectually sharp as you should be, because you need to be on the edge. Why do baseball players, why do they have uniforms, right? We're together in business. That was part of the uniform of going to the office. Doesn't mean you have to wear a tie, but yeah, you sort of had slacks and a sports jacket or a shirt. That makes it look like I'm off to play the game, and you play to win the game. So you want to be mentally sharp as you can, and those are all the little things around that I think are important to success. Yeah, and so I don't want, if I'm Zooming with some VC person, I don't want to see them in their living room hanging out on the couch with their cat or their dog or whatever. Of course, if you're at home, your children are always going to be around and things are going to happen. That's a different story, as it should be, because in theory, you do want your kids to spend time with you. And so that's okay if they interrupt every once in a while.
Yeah, that happens to me all the time. It's really interesting because I feel like you've had such a long career, kind of profit, nonprofit. You had the multi-strat, and now you're on to this next fund. I'd love to hear a little bit about the evolution and kind of the out-of-the-box thinking of how you came up with this new strategy.
Well, the market's always right and you're wrong. So you could spend a lot of time working on something and you have to realize that, okay, there's no traction for it, or there's no appetite for your skills. I promise you that if any NBA team reached out to me today, I would sign up with them tomorrow and be there. That's not going to happen, right? I don't have the skill set for that. So the marketplace is telling me I better do something else. What the marketplace told me is that in today's world, to credit to regulatory policy, and I don't want to get too political, even though everyone knows that I'm a Democrat that believes in markets, is that the public markets have been very democratized through Regulation FD, through the filings of 13Fs, through the fact that there's earnings calls, and anybody in the world can join that earnings call. So the informational edge is much reduced in public markets. Now, that doesn't mean that they're not going to go up or going down because of factors individual to the company or not. It just means to me that, as I indicated, if you're going to trade, you should trade frequently, take opportunities of dislocations, or you shouldn't trade very much at all. But mid-frequency trading, which is sort of where we grow up, and that mid-frequency to me can be anywhere from 4 to 20 days, so a week to a month in terms of trading days. Those returns have been eliminated to a large extent. Where there is information arbitrage is in the private markets, because they have to seek you out, you have to seek them out, and now you're doing your due diligence, not just because they're not public. So are they financially viable? You can have great ideas. We can go back to the history of Microsoft, and everybody uses Word today. Before that, in Excel, there was WordPerfect, there was Lotus. Everybody thought, well, those might be better products. But what makes a successful product? So you can peel back the layers on that as a private person. The other thing is human capital when it comes to startup and early stage is more important than anything. You can have really great technology, and I've seen a number of these things, and I'm like, well, we'd like you to be an advisor or like you to invest, and you go and you know what, I don't think this person has the ability to run and grow the company. And that great philosopher Clint Eastwood said, a man needs to know his own limitations. And if you're trying to build and grow a business and the CEO doesn't know their own limitations and isn't willing to listen to outside guidance, their board or their investors, it's not going to be successful. It's one reason why I'm not negative. And in fact, I don't know if I want to say I'm bullish, but on SPACs, because they're out there looking at all these private companies before they go public. The SPAC is public. And so they get that informational arbitrage. Now it's the same thing. What is the leader of the SPAC? What is the area they're looking in? And of course, in some ways, if you purchase a SPAC, you have on day one, you're paying somewhat of a 2-year free call option. As it gets closer to that expiration, you have to have confidence in the management itself in that public company that they're not going to rush to do a combination because of the expiration of that option, and then the money would go back to the investors. So there's still a tremendous amount of work that you as an individual, if you're investing in a SPAC, is public, but the right SPACs with the right leaders taking advantage of that information arbitrage. Now they're buying a company, taking it public, feeling that its value is discounted to the expectation of what the public as a whole, when they take a look at it, will see that value is. That is a human capital investment in the SPAC, but I like the idea of that transitory movement of being able to go public through that information arbitrage that you have with private companies. And also for me, it's also more exciting, right, to see and be involved in new things. Now, that part of a diversification of a portfolio doesn't mean you shouldn't be invested in a broad range of equities either. But for me personally, you want to do that. And so you need to be invested, if you're doing that, either in a fund that's investing in a bunch of companies, or you have to be. Because if you're going to go to Las Vegas and you're putting all your money on one number on the roulette table, there's always an outlier that might get lucky. I know me, I'm guaranteed to lose.
Yeah. I go to Vegas knowing I'm going to lose.
Right. I don't gamble. I don't even go to Vegas, because when you invest, when you trade, there is a difference, right? When you gamble, you know that the probability of success is negative. You want to do investment where you think the expected value is positive. And if you're going to game, whether that's Vegas or, DraftKings or whatever, where the expected value is negative, then you should keep it very small.
It's so funny. I was just going to ask you 2 questions, which is where you seeing value or opportunity. And I was going to ask you about diversification, which you just tapped onto. Any other places where you're seeing opportunity?
Well, you want to diversify, but you don't want to over diversify. Right?
Yes.
If you over diversify, then you're just sort of going to get the average. Then you might as well continue to not do it. When I was in the CTA business, and you talked about where we were allocating, and you have these CTAs that trade in 50 markets around the world, to me, there's no hope of really outperformance. What you want is to be in 15, 17 markets. You want to diversify in that sense from a futures trading perspective. If you're going to be invested in funds as an individual, you don't want to be invested in so many funds, right? They're cross-setting each other. You have multiple fees. You have multiple costs. So you want to be diversified, but there's that fine line before you get over-diversified.
Yeah, because you diversify away your returns.
Yes.
Yep.
And costs are just that, costs.
Yeah, right. So that gets back to value.
Unless you're at the Fed and you're giving away free money.
Right. Normally, everyone asks, where did you go wrong and what did you learn? But I would like to ask you the question, what did you get right?
That's a tricky question on both sides of that equation. What did you get wrong? What did you get right? To me, the most important thing in my life was getting right the appropriate balance between, once I had some success, some work, and the family. Because as you do that, you have to decide really, okay, in your 20s, as we said at the very beginning, yes, you are working 16 hours a day. Or as they said, JP, they go, okay, you need 10,000 hours, according to Malcolm Gladwell, to be an expert. if you work a normal time, so call it, 40 hours a week, whatever, $2,100 a year, that's 5 years. They want to like, hey, we want to compress that into 2 to 2.5 years. So you really got to work 16 hours a day. And you can do that when you're young because you're mentally in shape and physically. But as you move forward, as we said, into your 30s, and if you have a relationship or having a kid, what are your priorities? Do you want to stay married to that type of lifestyle, or do you want to stay married to your spouse? And for me, that balance, my priorities, not somebody else's priorities, and it's different. I wanted to be there for them because I'm so much of an economist and I believe everything's at the margin. And you get into these tremendously subtly bad habits. So your daughter's playing a softball game and you're like, I'm going to miss it today because there's 20 games in her season. I can get it up there. But then you miss the first one and then you go, well, the second one, and I got this meeting or presentation and it's kind of cold and drizzly out and I don't want to be on the sideline. And all of a sudden the season's gone. And then it's swim season. And you're like, oh, my phone doesn't really work well. I'm sitting in the pool. There's all these other people there. I don't have privacy. I'm waiting around for 2 hours to watch her swim 30 second. And all of a sudden time passes by. And then you look back and you think about your personal relationships with yourself, most importantly, with your spouse, with your children. So to me, I think in my mind, that's what I got right, because they're in a good place. And maybe I'm harping on this because it's my 32nd wedding anniversary on Thursday. So
Congrats.
thank you. It's fresh in my mind. But all excellent traders, they never remember their winners, right? They learn from their losers. And we can all do that, but you can learn from your losers when it comes to your personal relationships and with your children, if you have them or you're planning on having them. Because when you're young, and there was always that attitude, maybe coming up in the 80s in Wall Street and watching the movie, it was kind of like he who has the most toys wins. But now I'm at the point where my dad's 94 and struggling. I'm like, I've never seen a hearse with a luggage rack on it. So do you really need all those toys? What's your priority?
Yeah, agreed. I think that reassessment is really important. I agree with you. Have to be there. You have to show up. I'll probably ask like this one last question. Peter, what are the pivotal points in your career that changed your life?
Well, I think there's a couple of things, not necessarily changing life, but it led to this point. When you're at a firm like we were at Tudor and we started and we helped build an industry, when you have somebody who's got such a dynamic personality as Paul, and I've been extraordinarily lucky. I've been around a lot of really successful, wealthy people. We see them. We had the Robinhood benefit this week, and I didn't realize it, but to his credit, there's nobody truer to himself than he is. When we first started out and we're in our 20s and we're trying to build a business and we're in Riverside Park, playing basketball or going to get some Mexican food afterwards. You sit down with him today, yeah, he's got obviously different means by a lot, but he's the same guy. When I left that and started building my own business, my own CTA, I didn't realize the hardest transition for me was when you're with somebody like that and you have a really bad day, you can walk down to their office and sit on the couch and go, what's going on? What's wrong? I can't believe this drawdown. I can't believe I just did something so stupid. And his job as the boss, the head coach, is to try to, motivate you and put you in the best position to succeed. When you leave and you're on your own, you don't have that office to walk down to. It's your office. And you have to take that other role and you have to project success even when there's really difficult circumstances. So that transition took me a little while. And then also It took me some time because we had that success early and, PBS did that video and it's out there. And then do you want to be humble? Do you look away from that success? And now, of course, all these years later, I think it's aged fairly well. And I could look back at that and use that as an example of innovation. All the little things that we were doing technology wise, which were so far advanced that you saw in that video today, they're quaint. But the mobile quoting with the antenna sticking to the sky, or the color printer that took 5 minutes to print one page, but we invested in that. So that transition was difficult. And then, like any athlete, the transition of knowing when to hang up your cleats. But that's where my partner, John, and that having that relationship together. And if I just add, I'll use the analogy, great a quarterback as Tom Brady is. In every film session, he has a coach in there. Now, the coach isn't saying I'm better than you, but he's looking at that coach perspective, experience, or just somebody to have a sounding board. We all need to have a sounding board. And that goes back to the VC and the advisors and the CEO. If they're not willing to listen, if they're not willing to listen to their board, that's a problem. So I'm always trying to look for people that I know that are smart, that have a perspective. And that's essential when it comes to markets, but it's most essential, which is the whole thing, is risk management. And our motto for the last 30 years has always been discipline before vision. It's fun to talk about all these things that may happen, but you succeed by having discipline and listening to the markets.
It's so interesting. And the help that you provide with the mentoring, is it also value stream, the advisory board for young entrepreneurs? I mean, it's amazing, the coaching. Once you learned it, you really encompassed it.
I talk to a lot of people, whether it's Value Stream and Greg or others, but even then now they've been around for a while, so they're growing. They need it less, and some of their portfolio companies have done well. But even now, if it's friends and they're graduating college and everybody thinks, oh, thank you for doing me a favor. And I'm like, you got it all wrong. It's backwards. First of all, I'm not a nice guy. I'm not doing you a favor. It's really self-interest in my part because I know you're going to be successful. And where you end up and how you do is going to be relevant for the next generation, my kids having kids and all that interaction. And it's my whole thought of philanthropy, which is if you give it away, you'll make it. If you continually wait, then what's the point? Be present and be engaged in areas of which you're passionate about. And that's why I'm like, I always have a soft spot for somebody that has a good heart. Now, it may not be my own personal interest, which is okay. But if it's your personal interest and that's something you want to pursue, if I can provide some advice or I can connect you with an organization, fantastic. So the mentoring to a large extent or coaching, it keeps me intellectually sharp. And believe me, I need that for sure.
I think we all need that. Thanks, Peter. Thanks for your time today.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for having me, and good luck getting this down to something that's usable.
Thank you for listening to PrimeAlpha's Visionaries and Innovators podcasts. As always, you can head over to PrimeAlpha.com to sign up to our email list, as well as check out our other podcasts. See you next time.